First of all, quick reminder, assignment 1 is due, technically it's due at February 5th, but it is due to my mistake. In original class plan, I had a typo that it's due on February 5th, but it was actually planned that it is this Friday. It is indeed typo, but of course I decided to stick to the typo, but change it here. Okay, it was in the class plan, week 3, but it was saying Friday, February 5th, but February 5th, it's not even Friday, it's Saturday next week. It was because of, it's not even typo, it's because of copy-paste that I forgot to change. I was copy-pasting stuff from previous year, and in the previous year, assignment was due on February 5th, because we started later, and this was the reason. And I forgot to change. I made sure that everything is fine. I changed this to January 28th, but technically it is still February 5th. If you submit it before February 5th deadline, you won't get any penalty. Why did I change it? Because I realized this issue after weekend, not before weekend. So if somebody look at class plan and look at, okay, I have another weekend before it is due, but I said, oh, it's my mistake after weekend, so the person doesn't have weekend to do it. So this is the reason. So technically, I really expect that you submit it tonight, but if you submit it later, yeah, no penalty if it is before February 5th midnight. And I keep sticking to that it's due on Friday for several reasons, because I don't want you to work on weekends, although it's in some case scenarios it's inevitable, because this is a time when we have more time. But if something is due on Saturday, it looks like I'm encouraging you to work on Saturday, and this is not a great idea. Everyone should have some relaxing days, even working on Saturday maybe, or Sunday, it's not. And obviously you have up to 3 days to submit it after deadline with penalty, and it looks like if it's not submitted on Friday, like assignment 2, for assignment 1, it's a different story. For assignment 2, if it's not submitted on Friday, okay, you can submit it on Saturday night with penalty. So it's 5% or whatever it is. So let's, that was a brief discussion what happened. Regarding assignment, it's technically due February 5th, but expected kind of you do it tonight or at least soon. So in class plan, so far I'm doing reasonably well. Dependency injection was wasn't discussed in details, but it was kind of hand-waving discussion. I will keep doing that, and I will eventually switch to more formal description of it, either here in Advanced or in the next week. From my experience with Spring Boot, going into formal description of the Spring Framework immediately, it is overwhelming a lot, because we learn tons of details, and it's not even clear how they're going to be used. For this reason, I'm postponing it. Formal description of it, I'm just saying that you define classes with annotations, and system is processing the classes, and it will put them together at start time, application start time, by using dependency injection. So this is the idea. You define the system by certain classes with special annotations, and those classes must be in specific package associated with the program. So when you create a project, you specify package, and those classes must be inside of the package to be found by default. If it is not there, it won't be found by default. So, good point, put it in the package associated with the program, and it will be found by default, and it will connect to proper part of the framework by dependency injection, so it will start working. So this is kind of hands-waving description of what is going on. What is dependency injection? It's a framework that is creating classes, especially described classes, when they are needed, and connect them together. So this is the idea. Typically at starting time. They need it at starting time of the app, but not necessary. So this is the idea about dependency injection. It is used in Android, and you took Android course with me, and we discussed dependency injection there. A difference between dependency injection in Spring Framework and Android Framework. Dependency injection in Spring Framework is done when application starts. Dependency injection in Android Framework is done when application compiles. So this is the difference. So some of the dependency injection, dependency injection work for Android is done at compile time, so they save starting time of the app. And for mobile applications, this is really important to have quick start of the app. But if it is web application, starting time of the app is not important, because when you start to talk with website, it's already running, and it maybe it's already running for years when you start to talk for it, start to send messages to it. So starting time is less important for web apps. For this reason, it's not an issue if it is done. Dependency injection is done at starting at time when application starts. So again, this is hands-waving description what is going on, and we will look into details a little bit later. Perhaps here, advanced. Okay. Today, at the previous lesson, we previous lessons, we learned about basic idea about using Spring MVC. But we were missing one critically important part, how to do validations of user inputs. I emphasized this many times at the previous lessons, because currently we're using simplest approach, because at least we need to learn that. But eventually we will learn how to do it better. But in order to understand how to do it better, we need to understand at least simplest approach this way. And today is the time. Today is entire lesson is devoted to validation of user inputs with Spring Framework. So this is the idea. Validation of user inputs with Spring Framework. I emphasized validation several times, at least when I was describing kitty message example, when I was describing dice roll example, you saw that it is crashing if type is wrong. You also saw this kind of crash. You didn't see this kind of crashing when it was math multiplication quiz example, because I used brute force trick. Instead of taking numbers, I was treating numbers as strings, and string is always valid. Whatever you type, it's a string. So it is taking string, and it was scanning it. And if string conversion to number is throwing exception is caught, and when exception is caught, it's showing a page or bad input page. This brute force approach are definitely valid in simple case scenarios, but if we have a complicated input to validate, it is a lot of overhead to write each time. For this reason, there is a standardized way to validate content of objects. Limitation It's validation of the content of objects, by definition. You cannot use this framework to validate just a number or set of numbers unless you put them into one object, and after this you run validator. So there is a standardized way to do it. And it's not even part of Spring Standard. It's more general. It's part of Java Enterprise Standard. So validation of content of objects is standardized in Java Enterprise. And Spring is using this standard. There is a software entirely devoted, written in Java, entirely devoted to validation of content of the objects. And it is extremely flexible. So you can use it as a library. It doesn't have to be web application. Any kind of Java application can use it. And since it is defined as standard, several libraries or frameworks comply to the standard. First, let's look at example hello user. It is not the same as hello user 2. It is bigger. Please clone it and open it. And I will open it using from my hard drive. Please clone hello user Spring Boot. So hello user, here it is. I will shrink this picture. And go to project, and here it is. By default, it should open probably in master, because master is default branch. Please switch it to step 1. I'm not sure what is master. So please switch it to step 1. So you select step 1 here, because you don't have this one, because you didn't open this locally yet. So switch to step 1 and click checkout. So I did check out my step 1 because it's simplest, and I will go through building complexity quite quickly, and within 1 hour, till 1 o'clock, we will finish. Maybe steps 7 and 8 will be after break. Last 2 steps will be maybe after break. So let's see what we have here. First, what is included? I open POM XML and see what stuff is, what options I selected when I created this project. I selected time leaf and I selected Spring Boot, Spring Web. Okay? So this project was created exactly the same way as we created any other project so far. This testing part is included by default. So nothing special about creating this project. I added output HTML the same way as we did. I added CSS the same way as we did. And I created controller. My controller has logger and mapping to default address and to output address. This logger is configured in properties, and in properties it is trace for my package. So for everything in this subpackage, it is trace. Trace, this logging level is regulate how much of the log you want to see. If it is trace, you will see trace, debug, and arrow messages. If it is debug, you will see only debug and arrow. If it is arrow, you will see only arrow messages. If you don't write it, anything, you don't have configuration, you will see only arrow messages. This is default, so you don't need this line, but it is just a reminder that you can change port if you want. And then output shown by default, and it is empty, kind of empty. It says hello Sheridan. I have some dynamic path. When it is indeed template because it contains th th namespace, and style sheet is included with href and href. When you open this in the browser, browser doesn't understand th namespace, so it will pick this. And this is correct because it's a correct location with respect to the template. This one. Step outside of template folder, step into static, step into CSS. So, but when you run this on the Java server, these folders like static, like resources static, they're all hidden. This part will be shown from the address of slash, right? Because it's default one, from slash. So you need to step into CSS and pick main. So this is what it is. Step into CSS and pick main. When we run something on the server and we provide attribute without th and attribute with th, server side will ignore this part and it will use th and it will give it to the browser as without it. This part will override this part on the server. Well, what is this? The same logic. If you open this in a browser like this, things that are not understood by HTML server, like this part, will be left alone. So it will show HTML here. Java word will not replace HTML. So this is why when I show get it on HTML server built into IntelliJ IDEA, I get running on HTML server message. Running on HTML server. This th text is not replacing HTML. But when I run it on Java server, by clicking this one, I need to wait a little bit. I will see messages when it starts. It's started hello user application. Now I can go to localhost 8080 and I see running on Java server. So this part was replaced by this word Java. And this also replaces this. So if we open view page source, we will see that Java now it's in the middle of span. You see, Java in the middle of span. And this part became assigned to href. All right? So this is behavior. And this is a demo using such simple example. And this is it about step 1, nothing else. So I press stop. Questions? It is just quick reminder. All right? You're familiar with it, maybe not this particular part, but about approach, because it is key. I keep reusing it. So now I will check out step 2. Step 2, checkout. Now I have random number, so it is familiar to you, and I also display some content of some user object. So let's look into controller and see what we have. We have the same output is mapped to slash and slash to output. This is logger message that I will see at the bottom when I run it. I create user object by providing two constructors for two parameters, first name and last name. So let's open user object. It is defined in the domain. Default values, it's empty. Constructor will use empty values by default. And I have a constructor with two parameters assigned to instance variables. This refers to that one. And I have necessary setters and getters. Please notice that sometimes IntelliJ IDEA doesn't understand that you need a setter and shows that it's not used. In this case, it's true, it's not used. But when you receive it as an object inside of controller, sometimes it is confused and say it's not used. But it is indeed used, because when you receive it as an object inside of the controller, it has to call constructor without parameters and call setter afterwards. Because It cannot know what kind of constructor. No, it can know, but it cannot resolve, run your logic, what kind of constructor you want to use. So it is picking without arguments, and it's calling setters for each parameter. And just because I want to make it formally satisfy Java Bean requirement, I made it serializable, although it's not used. It's not used. So what happens here? I created Bart Simpson object, and I created random number between 1 and 100. How it works? This is starting, this is how many. And I end up with 100. Right? And I added this object to the model user. And if you add object to the model, model is defined as parameter of this function. So model is created by the system and injected. This value inside of the object will be available inside of template using this name. Okay? And this is just a number. But when you put it into attribute, it will be converted to integer object. So this is just an int. But when it becomes attribute, it will be automatically wrapped, boxed. It's called boxy. It will be automatically boxed into integer object. When I open output, this is an object, and this is calling getter. So this is calling getter. This is also calling getter. And if you don't write anything, it will call to string. Don't specify what you want. This will technically also call this will call to string. To string of integer object. And that to string method of integer object will give us string that is associated with this integer object. If we want to see that it is indeed calling getters, we can insert log messages, and you can see it here. If you copy this log, obviously you need to change this to that class, so it will be given, message will be given with respect to that class in printout, and do trace inside of this object, and you will see it's actually calling getters. I will leave it as exercise. So for you to verify that it is indeed calling getters. Otherwise, first of all, it's private. If it is private, the direct question, does it mean that it's not accessible at all? This is a really good question. If it is private, does it mean it's not accessible at all? Your answer is right, not entirely. So you obviously know what I mean. If it is private, you can access it with getters, right? But it's not the case. If you even don't have a getter, it is accessible, even when it is private. Just because in Java and other advanced languages, such as C# do have built-in feature called reflection. This gives us option to look inside of any object programmatically and see what is there and access it. It's called reflection. So technically it is accessible, but it's hard way. Accessible, but hard way. Even if it's private, and even if it's no getter. But typically it's not encouraged to do unless we really need to for some reason. So this is why we don't need it. This is why we don't do it. But it is accessible if we use the reflection feature. So let's continue. We are inside of controller, we set it up, and it is printing, so we need to run it in order to see it. Inside of the template, I found default. I wrote default. So if I open this template using HTML server, I will see hello Tetervac and 34 in HTML. Those default space holders that I use in order to debug appearance. Because otherwise I would have to restart Java server. It's super tedious, right? But if I want to see this dynamic stuff, I start Java server and I go to localhost 8080. And I see Bart Simpson, Java server, and this is indeed random. You see, it's changing. So this is how it behaves. Are you already familiar with this up to some degree? You probably didn't see get first name, get last name, but we certainly call it some getters. We call it some getters this way for dice roller object. We call it getters such way for, what else? Math quiz, right? Kitty message. Okay, so it's not new. Now, I believe it's explaining this. Let's switch to step 3 and see what is inside of step 3. Check out step 3, and I will stop running it because I want to restart it anyway. So in step 3, I still have one output page, right? Linked to this address. Is there anything new here? I don't think so. It's exactly the same, right? So constructor is controller is exactly the same in step 3. But what I changed is output. So yeah, I will just open it and show difference. Okay, this way it's easier. Remember that we had user.firstname, user.lastname. It was $, user.firstname, user.lastname. We can take user part outside of kind of bracket into a wrapping tag. In this case, it is H2 tag, you see? And if you take this part into outside tag H2, you can refer to it by star. At this moment, it is just pure convenience. You bound object to outside tag and you refer to this inside. At this moment, it's just pure convenience, pure shortcut, but we will use it later, the same approach. If H2 is not H2, but form, input form. When we use it with input form, it has a deeper meaning. Okay? But at this moment, it is just a shortcut. Right? So the user is taken outside. If we run it, it will do exactly the same. I won't run. Believe me, it will. And just because when we run it, it won't change anything. It will be exactly the same. So I don't run it. Step 4. Check out step 4. I'm going to controller, and now you see two address, input page and output address. For output address, I'm showing output HTML template. So what happens here? Essentially nothing. When you show input page, it prints logger message and shows static page, nothing there. Essentially static. This Java will replace this one, and this is it. But you will see form that is submitting something, technically nothing, to this address. And if you open this page in a browser on HTML server, in the browser directly, it will go to output HTML. So what is the purpose of this demo? to show behavior when you have a just form in it. Right? So this is the purpose of it. So when I open this in browser, on HTML server, you see HTML server. When I click view page source, you see this is not understood by HTML server. So browser will take it from here. So when you click OK, you go from input HTML to output HTML. And this stays as default. You see? As default inside of output HTML. 34 Alex Tetervak HTML. But if you run it on the server, let's run it on the server. This form will be submitted to address output. This one. And this address is handled by controller, address output. What would it do? It will create model, it will create Bart Simpson, random number, edit here and show. So this is the same. All right. So let's see what happens. Going to localhost 8080. I send OK, and it shows me Bart Simpson, back input, Java server. Right. So what is the purpose of the demo? To show how form itself behaves without sending any data. So it is, I would say, if you deal with any form, it's probably first step to do, to make sure that your addresses work right. That addresses are fine. Next, questions? So step 3 is just showing the behavior of empty form, nothing special. So I stop it, and I go to step 5. Check out. Now it's more interesting. I go to input. My form is submitting something. I have label, labeling input. First name it's a label. This is how we link label to input. We can do it this way, or we can wrap it into label. I did it this way, pedestrian way. There is a fancy way, you wrap it inside of label, like that, and put label there. This is here. Leave it empty, it's still empty, no validation, obviously. But what is the difference? I receive at user a single object. So this is how it was simplest case scenario in Kitty message. Now, I believe it's reasonably understood how it works, right? One thing that you may accidentally discover, and you kind of wonder why. Okay, so let's talk, since we have a couple minutes before break, so let's talk about this one. Okay, what if I comment this part? So I didn't add user to the model. Would it work? So I stop it. Let's see. So I started. I go back. I put some data. Okay, it's not Bart Simpson, right? Or put same. Why? There is a reason why. All right? So there is a reason why. So although this part seems like it's not always necessary, like in this case, I prefer to do it explicitly to avoid any kind of wandering, okay? There is a reason why. Let me explain what is the reason. When data is received, it is received inside of request. And when you show the page, this data is still within the same request. So template is able to pick it. It is kind of internal, undocumented feature. So I prefer not to use it this way. I do it explicitly. Right. I prefer to add this user explicitly to a two-model attribute again, although it's already inside of request when I display data. Okay. This is definitely necessary because it's not part of user input. So just because we receive a request and request object is propagating to template, template in some cases like this is able to pick the data and display it there. So this is kind of undocumented behavior that happens due to internal logic of the template system. I prefer not to count on it, so I do it explicitly. All right, so I will, although in some cases it will work, even if it is commented, I will try to keep it explicit. So now let's have a 10 minutes break till 1 o'clock, relaxing for 10 minutes. And after break, I will discuss validation.